By this time, Teresa's mother is panic-stricken. She's wondering what's going on.
After wrapping up their conversation with Travis's parents, Clarice and Brenda head straight to the police station to file a missing persons report.
Her daughter did not have a credit card. Her daughter didn't even have a cell phone.
There have been over 500 prosecutions for murder in the United States where the victim's body was never found. Over 50% of them were domestic violence cases, and 86% of those no-body murder prosecutions have ended in conviction.
The genuine currency he had so carefully copied collapsing under the weight of their own greed. Look at that, Dave, he whispered to Goldberg, who was serving his time in the same facility. They were printing worthless paper just like we were. Only they called it derivatives and subprime mortgages. And they didn't have to worry about hairspray tricking the pens. Goldberg didn't answer. He was a broken man, haunted by the loss of his family and the shame of his arrest. He didn't see the irony. He only saw the bars. Allison Sue visited once. She sat behind the plexiglass, looking at the man she had once loved, a man who had given her a luxury home in Woodland Hills and a life of comfort. They took the house. Al, she said, her voice small. The cars are gone. Everything is gone. It was all built on ghosts. I know, Albert said, his eyes reflecting the sterile light of the visiting room. I built a ghost town, and I invited you to live in it. I'm sorry for that. She didn't come back. Chapter 10, The Echo of the H to H38. The impact of Albert Talden's work didn't end with his arrest. It rippled through the American economy for years. Retailers like Target and Walmart had to invest millions in new, high-tech scanners that could detect the microscopic differences in fiber density that Albert's hairspray trick had masked. The Secret Service used the H2H38 as a case study for the next decade, training a new generation of agents to look beyond the feel of a bill and into the digital fingerprints left by consumer technology. In 2013, the Treasury released a new high-security $100 bill. It featured a 3D security ribbon and a bell in the inkwell that changed color. These were features designed specifically to thwart digital counterfeiters who, inspired by men like Talton, were becoming increasingly sophisticated. Kelly Harris stood at her desk in the specimen vault, holding one of the new bills. She looked at the blue ribbon and the complex holograms. "It's a beautiful piece of engineering," she said to her colleague. But somewhere out there, another Albert Talton is looking at this and saying, "I could do this better. Let them try," the colleague replied. "We're ready this time. Are we?" Kelly asked, her eyes drifting back to the drawer where the original H to H3800 was pinned. The alchemist didn't have a billion-dollar lab. He had a kitchen and a can of hairspray. You can't out-engineer a man who has nothing to lose and a mind that sees the world as a code to be broken. Epilogue: The Ghost in the Machine. The Lawndale Mint is a memory now. Its printers sold at government auctions, and its paper bales long ago recycled into actual newsprint. But the legacy of the H to H38 bills remains. Albert Talton is a free man today. He was released in late 2017 after serving his full sentence. He emerged into a world that had moved on, a world where physical cash was becoming increasingly irrelevant, replaced by digital wallets, cryptocurrencies, and invisible transactions. He walks the streets of Los Angeles, a man with a brilliant mind and a shadowed past. He doesn't have the Aston Martin or the Mercedes anymore. He doesn't have the luxury homes or the 7 flat screens. He lives a quiet life, perhaps working in a repair shop, taking things apart to see how they work, still looking for the math in the world around him. He is older now, his hair graying at the temples. He is no longer looking for the shortcut. He understands now that some codes aren't meant to be hacked. The alchemist of Lawndale learned the hard way that you can turn newsprint into gold for a while. But in the end, the only thing that's truly untraceable is a life lived with integrity. The H to H38 bills are slowly disappearing from circulation, being caught by scanners and shredded by the Treasury. But somewhere in a dusty register or a forgotten wallet, a ghost of Franklin is still staring back, a silent reminder of the man who almost stole the American dream. And in the quiet moments, when the LA traffic hums in the distance, Albert sometimes catches the scent of chemical ink and high-hold hairspray. He smiles a small, bittersweet smile, and then he keeps walking, moving forward into a world where the only thing he's trying to solve for is his own peace of mind. The end. The Bone Fields, a Shetland Mystery. Chapter 1, The Salt and the Stone. The wind in Shetland never truly sleeps. It is a restless, ancient thing that moans through the eaves of the gray stone houses and carries the sharp, stinging scent of brine and wet peat across the treeless hills. To the locals, it is a constant companion. To outsiders, a warning. For Detective Inspector Jimmy Paris, it was the soundtrack to a life defined by the rhythms of the North Sea of life, where the line between the land and the water was as blurred as the line between the past and the present. Inside his house, the morning was a chaotic blur of domesticity, a small island of warmth against the gray Atlantic morning. The kitchen smelled of slightly burnt toast, stale coffee, and the lingering dampness of wool coats that never quite dried. "Who's there? Is that you?" Jimmy called out from the hallway, his voice still thick with the remnants of a restless sleep haunted by dreams of dark water. His daughter, Cassie, burst into the room like a gale force wind. "Dad! Dad! Dad!" she shouted, her voice a sharp, youthful contrast to the low growl of the wind outside. "Have you got everything? You got your gloves and your homework?" And she stopped abruptly, dropping her bag on the floor and eyeing his attire with a look of profound teenage judgment. "What do you think this is? A fashion choice." Jimmy looked down at his sweater, a faded, oversized navy wool piece that had seen better decades. It was Norse mythology week at the station. "Cassie, I thought I'd blend in with the Vikings." "Right. Don't be cheeky," she retorted, her fingers flying as she stuffed a forgotten notebook into her bag. "And don't pretend like you're organized. We're 15 minutes late already, and I have that presentation on the clearances." He watched her with a pang of bittersweet pride. She had her mother's fire, a sharpness of mind that often left him feeling a step behind. Mama, Mama, he called out for his mother-in-law, the silent, sturdy anchor of their household. But only the rhythmic hum of the refrigerator answered him. She was likely already out, tending to the garden or visiting a neighbor, moving through the world with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had survived much. The drive to the Lerwick police station was a familiar, winding path through a landscape of charcoal gray cliffs and churning white water. The island seemed to hunker down under the weight of the clouds. Inside the station, the air was warmer, thick with the smell of floor wax and printer ink, but the atmosphere was no less busy. Morning, Billy. Jimmy nodded to the desk sergeant, a man whose face was a map of every minor infraction in Lerwick for the last 30 years. Morning, Craig, he added to the officer frantically filing paperwork. Anything besides the usual Friday night fallout? Robert Yunson's in the cells, Billy replied, not looking up from his ledger. Drunk in the market square at 3 this morning, singing at the top of his lungs. Some old Norse ballad about a giant and a whale. The tourists thought it was part of the local charm until he started trying to sacrifice a traffic cone. Jimmy chuckled, hanging his coat. Any news for the Uphelly AA committee? The town's buzzing. Billy's face finally broke into a grin. Uphelly the Great Fire Festival was the heartbeat of the winter, the moment when the islands reclaimed their Viking soul. It's Justin. The geyser Jarl thinks it'll be the best festival we've ever had. Oh, and I heard a rumor there's going to be a Lady Gaga squad this year. Imagine 40 Vikings in meat dresses. Jimmy laughed. You know anything about that, Billy? Billy leaned in conspiratorially, lowering his voice. Well, you see, I do. But then, if I told you the details of the Jarl's secret plans, I'd have to kill you. Kicks off as usual at 9:45. Your squad marches along the esplanade to the ferry terminal. Fire to the galley at 8. Then drink will be taken in quantities that will make my life very difficult. The camaraderie was a necessary shield against the isolation of the job. But the shield shattered the moment Sandy Wilson walked in. Sandy was a young officer usually eager and bright-eyed, the kind of boy who still believed the law was a simple thing. Today, however, he looked as though he had been hollowed out. His skin was the color of unbaked dough, and his eyes were wide and unfocused. Tea? Excuse me, Sandy stammered, nearly knocking over a stack of files. I'm sorry, Sandy. I didn't quite catch that, Jimmy said, his detective's instinct flaring. The boy wasn't just tired, he was in shock. It's her grandmother's croft, Sandy whispered, his voice cracking like thin ice. I don't understand. Whose grandmother? Mine, Sandy said, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on his cheek. She's been shot. Mima. She's dead. Jimmy. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier than the winter fog. It was the sound of a community's peace being torn asunder. Chapter 2. The Bresse Shore. The ferry to Bresse felt like it was moving through molasses, though the crossing was short. Jimmy stood at the railing, the icy spray stinging his face, trying to process the news. Mina Wilson was an institution of quiet, formidable woman who had lived on the edge of the world for 80 years. She was the kind of woman who knew every sheep by name and every secret by heart. The idea of her meeting a violent end was more than a crime. It was an affront to the island's soul. He reached the croft in 20 minutes. It was a lonely building, hunched against a ridge like a weathered bird, its whitewashed walls stained with orange lichen and green moss. Sandy was waiting outside, pacing a frantic circle in the gravel, his hands jammed deep into his pockets. Is there any sign of a break-in? Jimmy asked, his voice low, pulling on his professional mask like a suit of armor. There is some broken glass, Sandy said, gesturing with a trembling hand to a small side window near the kitchen. I called my cousin Ronald. His croft's just up the road. He passed back. She's just over the ridge. He found her. Could it have been an accident? Do you think a stray hunter? Sandy shook his head vehemently. A shotgun blast up close. No. She kept a gun in the hall cupboard for the rabbits and the foxes. But this wasn't that. This was. intentional. Jimmy checked his phone. The signal bar was dancing a frantic jig between 1 and 0. What's the signal like up here? I need to coordinate with the mainland. Comes and goes with the wind. You'll need to go up the hill to the old standing stone if you want a clear line. Right, Jimmy directed, his mind already mapping out the scene. Phone the hospital in Lerwick. Use the landline inside. But for God's sake, don't touch anything you don't have to. Get them to send an ambulance for the recovery. Set up a common approach path and put up a windshield. You think you can handle that? Sandy, I need you to be a policeman today, not a grandson. Yeah, Sandy said, though his voice betrayed him. Can I cover her up? It's starting to rain. No, Jimmy said, placing a firm, grounding hand on the young man's shoulder. I'm sorry. We need the forensics team to see exactly how she fell. We need photographs. Look, I know you were close, but we multifunction here. Sandy, we are the only wall between the victims and the dark. Don't let her down. As they moved toward the ridge, a phone began to ring. It wasn't the Crofts' old-fashioned landline. It was a sharp, modern, digital trill that felt jarringly alien in the ancient silence of the moor. Oh, sorry. Sandy fumbled with his pocket, his face flushing. It's mine. Oh, shit. It's the chief. Inspector. A voice crackled through the speaker, distorted by the poor reception. It was the chief constable, a man who preferred spreadsheets to crime scenes. Did I wake you? I've been trying to reach the station. No, sir. I've been up for ages. Jimmy lied, his eyes fixed on the ridge where a dark shape lay against the heather. Look, I could lose my signal at any moment. The chief's voice crackled. I heard a whisper about Bresse. Mima Wilson. Her family is. Well, they're vocal. This is going to be a mess if it's not handled quietly. You got that? Paras. Minimal fuss. Jimmy looked at the ground, at the blood soaking into the peat. I'm already here, sir. And minimal fuss isn't an option when a grandmother is murdered in her own backyard. Chapter 3, the weight of the earth. The crime scene was a study in grim stillness. Mima lay near the edge of an archaeological trench, a dark stain blossoming on the earth beneath her wool cardigan like a macabre flower. The cold had already begun to claim her, turning her skin to the color of the marble cliffs of Fettler. The gun hasn't been fired for years, Sandy noted, pointing to an old, rusted shotgun lying a few feet away. It was a double barrel, the wood stock silvered by age. Mima wouldn't even use it on the crows lately. Said she'd grown to fond of the noise they made. Did Mima own all this land? Jimmy asked, looking at the expansive view of the Sound. Yeah, Sandy replied. Since my grandfather died in the 50s. She never wanted to leave. People offered her a fortune for the view, but she just laughed at them. Your father, does he know? Yeah, he's at home. Joseph. I told him not to come down yet. I was worried about him seeing her like this, and I was worried about contamination. You did the right thing, Jimmy muttered. He turned his attention to the nearby archaeological dig, a series of open pits, meticulously tagged stakes, and orange mesh fencing that looked like surgical scars on the ancient landscape. What exactly are they looking for here? Archaeological team from Aberdeen University, Sandy explained, happy for a moment to focus on facts. Led by a Professor Paul Birkland. They've been here for 3 weeks. They think there's a Norse settlement buried under the ridge. Maybe even something older. Jimmy turned to a young woman standing just outside the police tape. She was small, her face smeared with mud and streaked with dried tears. A silver dental brace glinted when she bit her lip. Take as many photos as you can, Sandy, Jimmy ordered. The body, the angle of the entry wound, the surrounding footprints, everything. Then he mailed them to the specialists in Inverness. I want a preliminary opinion by lunch. He approached the student. I'm Detective Inspector Jimmy Perez. You are with the university team? Hattie James, she said, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. I'm a doctoral student. I found her. I came up early to check the drainage in the trenches after the rain. Oh God, I saw the coat and I thought she'd just fallen. I'm sorry, Hattie. This is a terrible thing to witness. You were close to her. She was wearing my coat, Hattie whispered, clutching her own arms as if she could still feel the phantom warmth of the garment. I gave it to her yesterday because it was pouring down and she'd come out without a shawl. Mima was like that. She'd take care of you. So you took care of her. I told her she could keep it until the dig was over. When was the last time you saw her alive? Last night. About 9. I left the Keeley, the local pub, and stopped in for a quick dram with her. She was her normal self, mostly. Maybe a bit distracted. Distracted by what? Hattie looked toward the deep trench. The discovery. Yesterday afternoon, Jackie Holden found something. She's a local volunteer. Ronald's mother. We were clearing the lower stratum when she found a piece of bone. I hoped it was just a fragment of an old pot, but it was a pars orbital, a human skull, frontal bone. Jimmy felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Bresse wind. A human skull. How did Mima react? She went white as a ghost. Hattie said she didn't like it. She said the ground should stay closed. She said some things were better left to the earth. Chapter 4, the Holden blood and the chocolate vodka. The Holden family lived in a house that was a jarring statement of modern wealth. It was a structure of glass and steel overlooking the harbor, a testament to the massive payouts from the pelagic fishing quotas. In Shetland, you were either old money, land, or new money, fish. The Haldanes were the kings of the latter. Inside, the air smelled of expensive cleaning products and something sweet. Ronald Holden sat at the expansive oak kitchen table, his eyes bloodshot, a bottle of Dutch chocolate vodka sitting half empty on the counter. His wife, Anna, hovered in the background, her eyes darting nervously toward her husband. You passed by the croft late last night, Ronald. Jimmy began, pulling up a chair. He didn't wait to be asked. Ronald grunted, his voice thick. I was just on my way home from Lerwick. It's a public road, isn't it? He was drinking Anna added quickly, her voice a pitch too high, like he does every night he's back from the sea. He gets restless. Look, I'm no long back from a month on the Cassandra. Ronald snapped, his fist thumping the table. I don't know what to do with myself on land. Now get off my back about where I drive. Calm down, Ronald. Jimmy said softly. The Cassandra was a state-of-the-art trawler, a floating factory. I'm trying to find out if you saw anything unusual. You took the last ferry? Aye. The 11 o'clock. Had a wee nightcap at the Keeley first. Didn't see a soul near Mima's place. It was black as a wolf's throat out there. And you, Anna, were you awake when he got in? The baby was sleeping, she said, smoothing her apron. I took the opportunity to rest. Jackie was here earlier, Ronald's mother. She stayed about half an hour. What did she want? To talk about that bone. Anna said. She was excited. She thinks it's some great Viking find. She's always been obsessed with the history of this place. She thinks the Haldanes have royal blood or some such nonsense. Jimmy turned his gaze back to Ronald. I hear you went out shooting after you got home. Ronald stiffened. Rabbits, they're a pest. You went out lamping for rabbits, drunk on chocolate vodka. At midnight? Jimmy asked, his tone hardening. I'll need to take your shotgun, Ronald, for ballistics. Standard procedure. Ronald stared at him. A flicker of something that looked remarkably like panicore, perhaps just pure, unadulterated resentment passing through his eyes. Take the damn thing. See if it brings Mima back. As Jimmy stepped out into the biting air, he found Jackie Haldane waiting by his car. She was a woman of 60, but her face was as hard as the granite she lived on. Jimmy Perez, she said, her voice like grinding stones. I knew your mother. A fine woman. You have her eyes, but your father's stubborn chin. She's well, Jackie, still in Fair Isle. We're all connected here, Jimmy, Jackie said, looking out toward Bresse. One big family, or we used to be. Before the oil money and the students and the incomers. It isn't safe anymore. People don't respect the boundaries. Hattie James said Mima was upset about the skull you found. Jimmy noted, watching her reaction. Jackie's expression didn't flicker. Mima was an old woman with old superstitions. She was possessive of that ridge. Joseph, her son, has been trying to get her to sell for years. Duncan Hunter wanted to build Viking lodges for the tourists. Mima was the only thing standing in the way of a lot of money. And now she's gone, Jimmy said. And now the land belongs to Joseph, Jackie replied, her eyes narrowing. A man who hasn't held a steady job since the 80s. Think on that, Detective. Chapter 5. The Shetland Bus and the Double Agent. Back at the Lerwick station, the walls felt like they were closing in. Jimmy sought refuge in the local museum, where Vicky, the curator, was waiting for him. Vicky had been his history teacher once, and she still treated him like a student who hadn't quite done his homework. The Shetland Bus, she said, laying out a series of grainy, silver gelatin prints. It's the greatest story these islands have, Jimmy. During the Nazi occupation of Norway, our fishing boats became a lifeline. They carried spies, radios, and explosives over. They brought refugees back. It was suicide work. My grandfather mentioned it, Jimmy recalled, but he never spoke about the details. That's because it was a war of shadows, Vicky explained. Look at this photo. 1943. That's Jerry Wilson, Nima's husband. And that young man next to him, that's Andrew Holdan, Ronald's grandfather. They were a team, inseparable. But in 1944, something went wrong. A mission to the Bergen coast was compromised. A group of Norwegian agents were captured and executed. The rumors started almost immediately that there was a double agent among the Shetlanders. Someone who was selling safe house coordinates for German gold. Jimmy leaned over the photo. The young men looked brave, but their eyes were haunted. What happened to the traitor? Vicky lowered her voice. The official records say the traitor was never found. But the island stories, they say the Shetlanders found him. A young Norwegian lad who had come over as a refugee. They say they didn't wait for a trial. They meted out their own justice in the dark of the moon. Justice on Mima's land? Jimmy asked, thinking of the ridge. Mima's family has owned that ridge since the 1800s, Vicky said. If someone wanted to hide a body forever, that's where they'd put it. But Jimmy, that skull Birkeland found, he thinks it's 15th century. He's looking for Vikings, not ghosts from the 1940s. Maybe, Jimmy mused. But Mima didn't react like it was an ancient Viking. She reacted like she knew whose face that bone belonged to. His radio chirped. It was Tosh, his sergeant, a bright, sharp-tongued woman from the mainland who found the islands both fascinating and infuriating. Inspector, we've got a problem, Tosh said. Professor Birkeland. He didn't go to his funding meeting. He was spotted boarding the Northlink ferry to Aberdeen 10 minutes ago. He's running. Get the harbor police to intercept. Jimmy barked. I want that professor back in an interview room before the ferry clears the breakwater. Chapter 6, Arrogance and the Gore-Tex Shield. Professor Paul Birkeland sat in the interview room, still wearing his expensive Gore-Tex waterproof jacket. He looked more annoyed than afraid. This is an international embarrassment, he declared, his accent a polished blend of Oslo and Oxford. I have a department to run, Paris. I have grants to secure. You left a murder scene, Professor, that makes you more than an embarrassment. It makes you a person of interest. Mima Wilson was an obstacle, Birkeland said, leaning back. She was a senile woman holding up one of the most significant Norse discoveries of the decade. Do you know what we found? Not just a skull, but coins. King James III groats. This site could redefine the Scottish-Norse handover of the islands. Is that why you killed her? Because she wanted to shut you down? Birkeland laughed. A cold, dry sound. I am a man of science, not a man of violence. Hattie James is the one you should watch. She's neurotic, as you locals say, obsessed with Mima. She was always over there, drinking tea, listening to those old stories. Maybe she wanted the land for herself. Hattie James is a student with no money and a dental brace. Jimmy said, You're a man whose career depends on this dig continuing. That night, the violence took a more visceral turn. Jimmy was called to the harbor road. A man lay crumpled in the shadows of a fish warehouse. It was Birkeland. He had been beaten, his expensive jacket torn, his face a purple mask of swelling. Nothing on the cameras, Tosh reported, her voice grim. They knew exactly where the blind spots were. This wasn't a mugging. His wallet is still in his pocket, cash untouched. Jimmy knelt by the professor. Who did this to you? Paul. Birkeland struggled to speak, his breath rattling in his chest. I didn't see. Too dark. But they said to leave the bones alone. They said some things stay buried for a reason. Who are they? Birkeland gripped Jimmy's arm, his eyes wide with a terror that hadn't been there before. The Islanders, Paris, your people, they're protecting a lie. Chapter 7, The Storm and the Warning. The wind rose to a full gale the next evening, rattling the windows of Jimmy's house like a persistent creditor. He was in the kitchen, trying to focus on a pot of pasta for Cassie, but his mind was a storm of its own. Dad, you're staring at the water again, Cassie said, leaning against the doorframe. Mom used to say that's when you were the most dangerous. I'm just thinking, Cass, about timing. Everything in this case is about timing. Pasta's burning, she noted calmly. He moved the pot, sighing. Listen, until we find out who attacked the professor, I want you to stay close to home. No Maury's, no late nights at the library. The atmosphere in town, it's changing. People are closing ranks. It's about the Haldanes, isn't it? She asked. Everyone knows Ronald's a mess, but no one wants to admit it because his family pays for the new football pitch and the community hall. Jimmy looked at his daughter. She saw the truth more clearly than most of his officers. It's more than that. It's about 80 years of history coming to the surface. The phone rang a sharp, desperate sound that cut through the wind. It was Hattie James. Jimmy, I found it. She gasped, her voice barely audible over the roar of the gale. I went back to the archives in the library. The census records for 1944. there was a Norwegian boy, Per Lundstedt. He was 20. He disappeared the same night the Shetland bus mission was compromised. Mima knew him. She loved him. Jimmy, Hattie, stay where you are. I'm coming to get you. No, I'm at the dig. I had to be sure. I found a box, Jimmy, near where the skull was. It's a metal cache, I think. I think it's the ledger, the names. A loud crash echoed through the phone, the sound of glass shattering, and a scream that was cut short. Hattie, Hattie, Jimmy yelled, but the line went dead. Tosh, Sandy, Jimmy shouted into his radio as he grabbed his keys. Missing person, Hattie James. Last seen at the Bresse dig. I want every available unit on that ferry now. The crossing to Bresse was a nightmare of white-capped waves and freezing rain. When Jimmy reached the ridge, the archaeological site was a scene from a horror film. The orange mesh was torn and flapping in the wind like the wings of a dying bird. Hattie's flashlight lay on the ground, its beam flickering weakly. He found her slumped against the mesh, her face pale, a deep gash on her temple. But she was breathing. Next to her, a small hole had been dug, not a professional archaeological trench, but a frantic, desperate excavation. And in the hole sat the rusted metal box. Chapter 8, The Reckoning at the Ridge. The investigation had reached its tipping point. The secrets of 1944 were no longer whispers. They were a roar.